All right, today we're digging into a really fascinating and honestly pretty tragic story out of Afghanistan. It's all about this unique political experiment, a kind of state born from a rebellion that just completely collapsed into civil war in only 5 years. So, how did that happen? Let's get into it. So, picture this, it's 1979. We're in the super remote, mountainous Hazarajat region right in central Afghanistan. And something incredible has just happened. A local uprising has actually succeeded. I mean, the central government has been totally kicked out. And for the very first time, the Hazara people, who have been oppressed for so long, have actually liberated their own land. And out of this victory, a new governing body starts to take shape. They're acting like a real state, with big dreams of self-governance. But then, flash forward just 5 years to 1984, and it's all gone. And here's the kicker. It wasn't defeated by the government in Kabul. It basically defeated itself. So the big question we have to ask is, what on earth went so wrong? Okay, so to really get why it all fell apart, we've got to go back to the beginning. The whole story really kicks off a year earlier, in 1978, when there's a Marxist coup in Kabul. Now, you might think that's a whole other can of worms, but for the Hazara people, who had been suffering for ages, this was actually seen as good news at first. Yeah, that optimism, it didn't last long at all. The new Marxist regime, you see, it was staffed by these really arrogant, totally inexperienced party members. And they started to just humiliate and push aside all the local leaders, the religious scholars, the intellectuals, the traditional elders. This, as you can imagine, sparked this huge, spontaneous rebellion all across the region. And bam, by the middle of 1979, the Hazarajat was free. So the government's gone. Now what? Well, the rebel leaders realized they had to create a new one from scratch. So in September of 79, they formed something called the Shura, which just means council, to govern the territory. And let me be clear, this wasn't just some loose alliance of warlords. No, this was a super ambitious attempt to build a real state. And that's really the best way to describe it, a proto-state. I mean, what is that, right? Well, it's basically an entity that has all the characteristics of a state. It has legitimacy from its people, it has an administration, it's got military control over its land. The only thing it's missing is that official stamp of approval, that recognition from other countries. Man, the shooter really acted like a modern government. I mean, check this out. It started collecting taxes, it issued its own ID cards, and even made people get official stamps just to travel through its territory. They were building the entire machinery of a functioning state, right there from the ground up. But, and this is the huge but, here's the problem. On the outside, the Shura looked pretty unified, but internally, it was like a house built on a totally fractured foundation. It was really just a coalition of rivals who all wanted completely different things. Let's break down who these groups actually were. All right, so the most powerful bloc in this whole Shura was the clergy, but even they were split right down the middle by this fundamental disagreement. On one side, you had what they called the Quietists. These guys believed the clerics should just provide religious guidance, not actually run the state. But on the other side, you had the revolutionaries, who were totally inspired by Iran's Ayatollah Khomeini, and they believed the clergy must seize power and build a radical Islamic state. Two completely different worlds. So you basically had four main factions all jammed together in this really uneasy alliance. First, the traditionalist clergy we just talked about. Then you had the radical Islamists, their polar opposites. Then you had the old secular landlords, the Khans, who were just trying to hang on to their power. And finally, you had the modern educated folks, the intelligentsia. A lot of them were actually Maoists or ethnic nationalists. These groups didn't just disagree on a few things, they had fundamentally opposing visions for what the future should even look like. So, with all these competing groups, who do you think they picked to lead this thing? They chose Ayatollah Beheshti, a quietist cleric. And why him? Well, mainly because he was seen as politically weak. All the other factions figured, hey, we can control this guy. But this compromise didn't solve any of their problems. It just papered over the cracks and kicked the can right down the road. You see, these internal divisions, they were a ticking time bomb. And it was the Shura's total failure to get support from outside countries that ended up lighting the fuse. So the Shura, they desperately needed help from the new Islamic Republic of Iran next door. Makes sense, right? But Iran's hardliners, they had zero interest in supporting Beheshti's moderate traditionalist leadership. So instead, they just bypassed the Shura completely and sent money and weapons directly to the radical Khomeinist factions inside Hazarajat. Ouch.
And the aid coming from Pakistan and the West, it turned out to be just as damaging. Instead of giving it to the Shura to strengthen their central government, the aid was channeled directly to individual local commanders. This just made those guys more powerful and gave them absolutely no reason to listen to the central leadership. You see what's happening? The Shura was basically being starved while its internal rivals were getting fed.
And all this foreign support didn't just weaken the Shura. It was like pouring gasoline on those internal fractures, turning what were just rivalries into open, violent conflict.
So now, flush with all this Iranian cash, the radical groups started building these sophisticated professional organizations. I mean, think about it. The Shura was relying on volunteers, but groups like Nasr and Pasdaran, they were recruiting and training full-time fighters. And they started to openly challenge the Shura for control of the territory. And what's really wild is that the leaders of these new radical groups were often former Shura members themselves. Guys like Siddiqui Neeli and Muhammad Akbari, who controlled key territories, they took the Iranian support, declared their independence, and literally began to dismantle the very state they had just helped create. From there, the end came really, really fast. In 1982, those key commanders officially defected. In 83, Pakistan cut off the last little trickle of aid they were getting. And then in 1984, the radical groups joined forces, launched an attack on the Shura's headquarters, and defeated them. Just like that, the dream of a self-governing Hazarajat was over, and it was replaced by an absolutely brutal civil war.
You know, Niamatullah Ibrahimi, the author of the source material for this, he puts it perfectly. He says, the diplomatic incompetence of the Shura was in turn the result of the weak political formation of its leaders. I mean, think about it. The leaders of the Shura were religious scholars, not seasoned politicians or diplomats. They were pushed into a role they were never trained for, and that political naivete, it proved to be fatal.
So, when you boil it all down, the Shura was an alliance of groups that really only agreed on one thing: getting rid of the central government. And once they did that, their deep divisions, all held together by a weak compromise leader, were totally exploited by foreign powers. These powers armed their more ruthless, more ideologically driven rivals, and the whole thing just imploded. And the whole story of the Shura leaves us with this really powerful question, doesn't it? They had a unity of purpose. They all wanted to liberate their homeland. But they completely lacked a unity of ideas about what to do next. It really makes you wonder, when you're trying to build something new, from the ground up, what's more important? What actually holds it all together?